What are the things that the male and female reproductive systems have in common? So both systems produce our sex cells, which are called gametes. In the females, the gametes are oocytes. And in males, they are what are called spermatocytes, or sperm. Both systems also produce sex hormones. In the female, we've got estrogen, which I'm going to abbreviate from now on as E2. That's like its chemical abbreviation. In humans, it's estradiol specifically. And the other one that females have is one called progesterone, abbreviated P4. In males, the sex hormones are primarily testosterone, but testosterone gets converted to another more potent androgen by prostatic fluid. It's called 5-DHT, which is 5-dihydroxytestosterone, and both of these are androgens. So those are the two biggest things that they have in common. The other thing is that they both have to mature, so you're not born functioning. So maturation happens at puberty, or I guess I should say maturation begins at puberty. Those are pretty much the most important things that the systems have in common. So we'll begin with a discussion of the female reproductive system. We'll pick up with males on Monday. So the functions of the female reproductive system are to produce our oocytes and to produce our female sex hormones. But then the other thing that the female reproduction system does is it provides a suitable environment for a growing fetus. So both males and females have primary and secondary sex organs. The primary sex organs are the gonads. So in females, those are the ovaries. So we can say primary organs are gonads. Oh, no, we're actually going to get through male reproduction today. What am I talking about? We're going to just cover female anatomy today, and then we'll pick up with female physiology on Monday. So as far as the anatomy goes, so that you're ready for your lab, the gametes, or the gonads, are these ovaries hanging out back here, and they produce the gametes, which are oocytes, and they also produce our sex hormones. So if you look at our models, then this is the way that the reproductive system sits in the body, and our ovaries are kind of back here, posterior in the pelvic cavity, and are hanging out laterally. So those are the ovaries, and those are our primary sex organs. Everything else is a secondary sex structure or an accessory structure. So our other structures in females are the uterine tubes, which are what our oocytes will be ovulated into. So sometimes these are called fallopian tubes. Sometimes they're called oviducts. All are acceptable terms. So on these models, you can see that our ovaries are here, and our uterine tubes come away from them. So that's this little green guy here is a uterine tube. Uterine tubes are going to carry an ovulated oocyte to the uterus. So that's our next organ, the uterus. And this is what's going to be the suitable environment for growing a fetus. So this is it's a muscular organ that houses a growing fetus. As far as layers of the uterus goes, it's got an inner layer. The innermost layer is called the endometrium. And it's got two parts, what's called the stratum basale, or the basal layer. And this is basically always going to be the same. The next layer is the stratum functionalis, and that's what's going to thicken and shed every month with menses. So our stratum basale is the basal layer, and we'll say it gives rise to the functional layer. So our next layer is the stratum functionalis. And this layer thickens and is shed every month unless there's pregnancy. Superficial to the endometrium is a thick muscular layer called the myometrium. And this is going to respond to oxytocin to contract. The outermost layer is our perimetrium. And this is our serosa. This is the uterus here, and it leads to our next tube, the vagina. And the vagina is the male, it's the copulatory organ so that it can receive the male reproductive organ, and it's the birth canal. So on this view you can also see some external genitalia, the labia minora and the labia majora. We've got another picture of that. So if you look at these models here, this is the uterus. If we open it up, we can see that this is the uterus here, and this is the vagina that leads to the external genitalia. So the internal view from the front, our ovaries are the gonads that are producing our gametes and our sex hormones. These uterine tubes lead away from the ovaries and lead to the uterus, and then from the uterus we go to the vagina. The different parts of the fallopian tubes that you should be aware of, these finger-like extensions are called fimbriae. And what they do is the ovaries aren't actually attached to the oviducts. They kind of sit inside them. So the fimbriae cause this wave-like motion, and they continually pull and pulse. And what that does is causes a wave in the fluid there, so that when an oocyte is ovulated, it gets pulled into the oviduct. So it goes from the fimbriae to the infundibulum to the ampulla to the isthmus. And then again our uterus, and then the vagina, which leads out to our external genitalia. So, ooh, I'm not supposed to have that picture there. So for our ovaries have these outer cortical regions that have this germinal epithelium. And in this picture we can see these little undeveloped things called, there are different sections that our follicle is going to develop through. So we're going to talk more about female reproductive physiology on Monday, but just to be aware that there are two processes going on in the ovary. What's called folliculogenesis, as we grow this follicle that's supporting our oocyte, and oogenesis, which is which is the process of maturing, well, not quite maturing, but growing our oocyte and getting it ready for ovulation. So some of them are going to be stimulated to become primary follicles. I don't necessarily see any primary follicles here, maybe some of these bigger ones, but these become primary follicles. Primary follicles are stimulated to become secondary follicles, so that's what these guys look like. These are secondary follicles. And at any given time you can have several secondary follicles in each of your ovaries, but only once a month one of those secondary follicles is going to become a Graafian follicle, or some books call them tertiary follicles, or some books call them vesicular follicles, or some books also call them antral follicles. And that's because this big fluid-filled space here is an antrum. And that antrum is going to build a lot of pressure so that when we have this thing called an LH surge, it's going to pop that oocyte out of the ovary. So all of those structures are generally seen in the cortex, this outer region. Another thing that we see here in this ovary is a corpus luteum. And what a corpus luteum is after ovulation, all of the cells that remain from that follicle are going to become this corpus luteum and secrete progesterone. So the corpus luteum is basically the cells that remain after ovulation, that remain in the ovary. This deep inner region is what's called the medulla. So it's just like with other organs, you've got an outer cortex and an inner medulla. As far as external sex organs go, the external genitalia has the labia majora and labia majora and labia minora. They're going to lead to this region called the vestibule or the vaginal orifice. You can see at the top here, I guess it would be anteriorly, is this, it's what's called the clitoris. This is actually female erectile tissue, which not everybody knows that, but it's erectile tissue. So as far as what things that you have to be able to recognize, are this figure's calling it a vaginal opening, but it's generally called the vaginal orifice or the vestibule. You need to know your labia minora, your labia majora, your clitoris, and then this region here, this large adipose deposition, your book calls the mons pubis, so that's what most books call it. So that's something that females have that males do not have, and those are all part of the external genitalia. Mammary glands are the last female reproductive organ, and they have the important function of producing and releasing milk. So prolactin is going to stimulate our mammary glands to produce milk, and oxytocin stimulates milk letdown. So I think that the regions that you have to recognize are mammary glands. So they're mammary glands, and they lead into, this is calling it ampullae, but these are also called lactiferous sinuses. And the